Hey gang, welcome to Volume 34 of Uncle Josh's True Scary Stories. I hope you'll dig these terrifying tales as we gather around the campfire once more. If you've got a story you'd like to hear on this channel, email unclejoshtruescarystories@gmail.com. Now, leave us not be hasty. Let's get it on. Vance's Ghost by Christy T. 6 years ago, I was in Oregon, visiting my mother when my cousin Vance died. He was only 27 years old and left behind a wife and two extremely devastated parents. Now, before I go into telling how he died and what happened afterwards, I should tell you that before Vance died, he had a lot of contact with ghosts. He had at least 4 that I know of in his and his wife Linda's house. They, the ghosts that is, were constantly at play, as he liked to put it. I can remember one time when we were all sitting around in the front room and everything flew off the fireplace mantel, like someone had just swiped their arm across it. Now this scared the hell out of me, but Vance just said, "Real funny. Put it all back." We left to go to dinner, and when we returned, everything was back up on the mantel. And that summer, a lot of strange things happened in that house, and so many, in fact, I stopped being scared and started accepting it as the norm. Near the end of the summer, we all, that is me, my cousin Laura, my mom, stepdad, my uncle, Vance, and his wife Linda, went up to the Illinois River to go camping. While we were there, Vance and my uncle got into a fight over the 30-foot waterfall on whether or not there was a ledge that went underneath it. After 10 minutes of arguing, my uncle said, "Fine, if there's a ledge, you take me down there and show me this ledge." So down to the water they went, Vance and my uncle, leaving me and my cousin Laura on the cliff above to watch. Vance made it to the ledge, but my uncle was nowhere to be seen. We later found out that he couldn't make it around the side of the waterfall, so he turned around and went back. Well, Laura and me could see Vance down below under the waterfall. As a matter of fact, we could see him perfectly since there was a split in the waterfall about halfway. He looked up at us and gave us a kind of nod and stepped off the ledge. He disappeared in the water and never came back up. They called in divers and found him 2 days later, wedged up under the same ledge he had been standing and stepped off of. The pressure from the waterfall had basically sucked him up under the ledge and held him there until the divers found him and pried him loose. The day of the funeral was when things started happening. Linda was getting dressed, and she was having trouble with a couple of things. First off, and don't laugh, she couldn't decide what bra to wear. The white one or the blue one. She chose the white, but then she couldn't find the ring that Vance had bought her when they were first engaged. She had always kept it in the top drawer of her jewelry box, but it wasn't there. Frustrated, she went to Vance's parents' house, and when she got there, she told Vance's mom about the ring. "Well, honey, why don't you wear his class ring? It's in my jewelry box," said Vance's mom. Well, when Linda opened the jewelry box, there was the ring that she had been looking for. How it got into Vance's mother's box, no one knows. Ghost? Maybe. We all went to the funeral, and the whole time I felt like we were being watched from the tree branches directly above us. You know that feeling when all the hair on your neck stands up and you get the creeps? But nothing was up there, and I know because I kept looking. On the way home, my mom asked me why I kept looking up, and I told her that I felt someone was watching us, and she just said, "I know." After dinner and a bit of comforting, Linda decided to go home. When she got there, the blue bra, which she was thinking of wearing earlier, was laid out on the front doorstep as if to say, "You should have worn this one." She just smiled and decided that it was Vance. As the weeks went on, little things would happen. Like love notes that he wrote her when he was alive, all of a sudden started popping up all over the place. After the funeral, she had thrown them all away. Or sometimes doors would be locked in the morning if she had forgotten to lock them the night before. Little protective things, like he was watching out for her. But then things started to take a turn. The nice things that he would do for her turned into malicious things. Things that she needed or would be missing, or doors would start slamming in the middle of the night and wake her up. Glasses were breaking in the kitchen, and she stopped sleeping well at night because, apart from the doors slamming, she heard footsteps walking around her bed constantly all night, every night. One time she was getting ready to go to dinner with a friend, and she was sitting at her vanity, and, like with the fireplace mantel, everything flew across the room. Very upset, she screamed, "Put it all back now!" and stormed out of the room. When she came back, everything was back on the vanity. But soon, anger and frustration gave way to fear as she started to think that maybe this ghost wasn't Vance. And it turns out she was right, and the worst was yet to come. Linda was really beginning to believe that this wasn't Vance. I mean, how could it be? Why would he want to do her any harm? So she did what her mother had told her to do in the beginning. She went to a psychic. Now, this woman, the psychic, right off the bat told Linda, "My goodness, honey, you've been going through quite a bit lately. Your husband has died within the last 6 months, correct?" Linda hadn't even told this woman her name, let alone what was going on in her life. Linda asked her what she was talking about, and the psychic said she could feel it all over her, all the frustration, sorrow, and hatred. The woman wanted to visit Linda's house, and they agreed on a time, and Linda left. When she got home, the house was torn apart. Furniture was turned over, lamps were broken, and there were scratches on the walls. Linda basically got the idea that whatever was in the house didn't like her going to the psychic, but she refused to let this deter her. Well, when the psychic visited her house, she was greeted by a phantom voice of an English gentleman. She had knocked, and he had told her to come in. Once she entered the house, she felt, or at least so she told Linda later, a very cold presence. Linda came out of the kitchen about this time and was startled to find the woman in her living room. "I didn't even hear you knock," she said. The psychic told her what had happened, and Linda agreed. She had often heard the Englishman too. Linda told the psychic that the spirit was nice, and he had always communicated to her when Vance was alive. He let her know when she was burning something on the stove or her clothes were done in the washer. However, she hadn't heard him in a long while. The psychic looked around for about 10 minutes and then abruptly stopped. She turned around and was white as a sheet. She looked at Linda and said, "You need to get out of this house as soon as possible." When Linda inquired as to what the woman had felt, she said, "Come to my house and we'll talk about it, but we need to go." Linda followed the woman back to her home, and her home is where Linda went to see her in the first place. When they got there, the woman told Linda that she was right. The spirit in the house was not that of Vance. It was of the Englishman. However, there were other spirits in the house, but they were minor. The Englishman was the most powerful. The psychic felt that when Vance was alive, the spirit had taken a liking to Linda. And when he died, the Englishman would just take his place, and played like it was Vance. When the psychic went back to when the spirit began to be, mean, Linda realized that that was about the time she began to go out more with friends. The psychic told her that the spirit had become jealous, and Linda asked the woman why she had become so pale as she was walking around the house. The psychic replied, "He told me to leave you alone, that you were his. I felt it throughout my whole body, all the hatred. You need to stay away from that house." Well, Linda agreed and decided to stay the night with Vance's parents. But she had to get some clothes and things from the house, so she called a male friend whom she worked with to go back to her house with her. When they got there, the house was, once again, in shambles. Rex, her male friend, was amazed to see the condition of the house. He had never believed in ghosts and still wasn't sure. He asked her if it was possible that someone might be playing a joke on her. She hadn't really filled him in on all of the details. She dismissed this idea at once and told him if he had heard the whole story, he would understand. So he asked to hear it. They sat down at the dining room table. I thought this was stupid. I would have just talked in the car on the way to my aunt and uncle's, not in the house. But Linda began her story of Vance's life, death, and the events afterward. Rex was full of questions and comments, and before they knew it, it was 1 in the morning. They had started talking around 6 p.m. Linda, realizing the time, suggested that they should get going. As they stood up from the table, there was a faint sound from the front door, which was to the left of them. As they both looked at the door, the sound got louder and louder. It was as if someone or something was first tapping, then knocking, then pounding, and then slamming into the door. Rex went over to the door to see whom or what was slamming into it. But just when he was about to open it, the entire door came off the hinges and was, well, kind of sucked out about 5 feet. But the stained glass window, which was the center of the door, stayed in its place. It never moved. Then, as fast as it was sucked out, it was sucked right back into its place. Rex about shit his pants. He wanted to leave right then, no later. Linda was hurrying to get her things together, but while she was doing this, the electricity went out. Rex was ready to bolt. There was no moon, and in the country there are no streetlights. It was pitch black, and Linda began looking for a flashlight, but since the house had been ransacked, she had trouble finding her bed in the dark. They decided to go, but the car wouldn't start. Rex was really freaking out now. He was babbling uncontrollably. And all of a sudden he screamed, "Look, I'll leave her alone. Just let me go." At that moment, the car started and Linda took off down the dirt driveway. Linda never went back. My aunt and uncle had a priest come out and he blessed the house, and I have no idea what that entailed. They were the ones who cleared everything out of the house and sold it. They had no problems while they were there, and who knows, maybe the blessing worked. I would like to get a hold of the new owners and see if they have had any weird things happen. Linda tried to talk to Rex after the incident, but he would have nothing to do with her. She would call him, and he would just hang up. She would try to talk to him at work, but he always shrugged her off, and finally, she just gave up. However, about 2 years ago, she received a letter from him, and she had moved to California by this time and remarried. He said he was sorry for turning his back on her after the incident at the house. He was afraid that if he talked to her, the spirit would get him too. He explained that while he was at her house that night, when the door was sucked out and sucked back in, he was hearing voices everywhere. They were telling him to stay away from her, that Linda was theirs, that if he didn't, they would kill him or drive him mad. That's why he had ignored her. Linda understood and wrote to him and told him so. And that's the end of the story. Neither Linda, Rex, or any of my family has ever been bothered again. Was I marked for death? Submitted by King Dave. When I was about 12 years old, I met this guy. He was about 20. I'll clarify that I'm a guy, and no, he wasn't some creepy dude that liked hanging out with 12-year-old boys. He was just a good dude. He and his family quickly became good friends of our family. He had 3 little brothers, and they were 5, 8, and 10, and he lived with his mom and stepdad. His mom was a real piece of work, just batshit crazy, and they had a crazy relationship. For instance, on his 21st birthday, she hit him with a broomstick and broke his arm. Anyway, they had all moved here from Arizona, and when we met, he became my best friend, like an older brother, and honestly, a better one than my own brother was. One day after we had known each other for a couple of years, and he was now 22 and I was 14, his mother decided they were moving back to Arizona. So they packed up all their shit and took off, leaving him behind to finish cleaning up the house and collecting the deposit from the landlord, stuff like that. About 2 weeks later, she came back to get him, and he didn't want to leave because he and my family and my other best friend had become really close. But he couldn't break away from her psycho grip. It was July 4th, and he was house-sitting for the day for another friend of ours, a really crazy kind of weird guy, but still a good guy too. My mom and I had gone over to bring him some barbecue for dinner, and we were all sitting around smoking a joint when he started talking strange. At first, he told me that he loved me like a brother, and I said, "Thanks, bro, I feel the same." Then he told me he was afraid to die alone, and he asked me if I would take care of his dog when he was gone. I said, sure, no problem. And then he went into his wallet and pulled out about $120 and gave it to me and said he didn't need it anymore. I told him I'd hold on to it, and none of this seemed strange at the time. I was sitting on the couch with my mom sitting next to me, and my friend Mike was sitting on the floor against the couch on the other side than my mom. It was dark in the house and real quiet, when all of a sudden I heard a click-clack pretty loud. I looked in the opposite direction from where my friend was because the sound echoed, and I heard my mom yell, "Mike, no!" And I looked over, and he had my friend's Colt .45 to his head. He had taken it out from under the cushion I was sitting on without me noticing, and I grabbed him with one hand on the gun and the other clenched on his shirt, and we scuffled for a second. He managed to jerk the gun away from my hand, and as I went to grab it again, I almost went deaf from the shot and felt the warmth of the blood and gray matter that splattered on my face. He had shot himself, and as he slumped over in my lap, I was trying to put pressure on the wound to control the bleeding. The exit wound from the .45 hollow point was bigger than my palm, and at the same time I was trying to cover the entry wound as my mom called 911. They asked her where the gun was, and it was still in his hand. The 911 operator said to take the gun from him in case he was conscious enough to shoot himself again or one of us. But I wasn't worried about the gun. I was trying to save my friend. The cops and ambulance showed up and took over, and I was covered in blood, brain matter with chunks of bone in my hair and clothes. The paramedics rolled him over and had to pry the gun from his hand. They call it the death grip. It's a result of sudden brain trauma. The police took our report and sent us home, and Mike didn't make it. The next day his mom showed up and asked me where Mike was, and I had to tell her what happened. She was very calm as she told me that she didn't believe he would do that. Hell, I didn't believe he would do it. But then she proceeded to tell me she believed that I had killed him. She had him cremated and took his ashes and went back to Arizona. And I wish I could say that this was the end of the story, but I've never had that luck. A few days after she left, a detective came to my house. Yeah, that bitch put me under investigation for murder. After about 3 hours of the worst kind of questions you could ask about this shit, my mom told them that that was enough and they left. Well, remember when 911 said to take the gun away? Well, it's a good thing I didn't, because that's what ultimately saved my ass. They said the only way for him to have a grip on the gun like that was for him to be holding it when he was shot. To them, it was an open and shut suicide. A few weeks later, my mom got a letter in the mail. It was from Mike's mom, and she said that we would pay for what we had done to her family, and that my mom would know how it felt to lose her son. Again, I wish I could say that was the end. About 8 months later, I was at a friend's house, and he introduced me to his cousin who grew up a few towns over. He asked me if we had ever met, and that I looked really familiar. We hadn't, but he was really tripping on how much he felt that he had seen me before. Anyway, I'd started telling my friend about what had happened to Mike that night, and the cousin got really excited and a little freaked out, as he told me now he remembered why he thought he knew me. He had seen a picture of me, and then he said Mike's mom's name and his name. Apparently, he was in a dope dealer's house, and the lady gave those two guys a photo of me and $10,000 to kill me. I wouldn't have believed him, but he knew things he couldn't possibly have known, and I got real paranoid after that and felt the need to carry a gun everywhere I went. The police said there was nothing they could do, and nothing ever happened. I figured the guys just took her money and that was it, but I still worry about it from time to time. Like I said, he had 3 little brothers that were raised to believe I murdered their older brother, so who knows if they want revenge or if they will come looking for me. I'm 37 now, and I still live in the same town and only a couple of miles from where it happened. I don't do social media, and I keep to myself a lot. I always have to know where my wife and kids are and keep security tight at my home. Anyway, that's my story. Not ghostly, but it's all true. Shared Room, submitted by K. Barker. Back in the early 1980s, I worked in Malvern, UK, night work in a very large old Victorian building that had been converted, like most, into a care home for the elderly. Although it was a care home, many residents sadly had dementia, so we were in fact a nursing home, cheaper and untrained for this. This building was massive, 5 floors in the basement, which was enormous. It had an old wooden staircase, kind of in the walls that would have been used for servants in the past. The basement I mentioned housed a small staff room, a large kitchen, small lounge, large wet room and toilet block, and a very large lounge. Only 2 staff worked the nights. It was cheap care. I worked with a woman, I'll refer to her as Dee. Dee and I loved the residents, and we were pretty protective of them. If they couldn't sleep, we would sit with them and have a chat and a laugh, as was often the case. The stories they had to tell were amazing, funny, and interesting. One evening, I came into work to be told one of our ladies was not expected to last the night. Between Dee and myself, we kept a vigil from the start of our shift onwards. The other residents hadn't gone to bed yet, as it was still early evening. A short time on, and the lady sadly passed. We sat with her and said our goodbyes, and I opened her window to let her go. I believe in doing that sort of thing. We called the undertakers, doctors, etc., and went about keeping the other residents distracted downstairs. It wouldn't be right to have the undertakers carry her out while the other folks could see. We managed to entertain everyone downstairs, and finally, when everything was over, we began helping them to bed. The lady who passed, I'll refer to her as Gloria, had shared a room with Dot, and that's not her real name. Sadly, they didn't really like each other. So, as I led Dot into her room, she asked why Gloria's bed was stripped and her things were gone. I quickly told her that Gloria, who had been bedridden for some time, had been taken to the hospital and would be staying there for now. Dot grinned and said she was glad. I told Dot that that was not a nice thing to say, but I understand she did want her own room. The night passed without incident, and as usual, exhausted, we began to help the early risers to get up. The alarm on the top floor rang out for assistance. It was Dot's room. Dot never wanted to get up early. I ran to the top floor and to Dot's door. The landing was dimly lit at night, and Dot's bedroom was dark. I called to Dot, but she was shouting and screaming, "Tell her to shut up! Tell her to shut up!" I reached for her light switch round the door, but I couldn't find it. Never had cause to use that light before, as Dot would do it herself. And then I heard mumbling from the other bed, a lady's voice grumbling and moaning. I seized up. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I would have sworn out loud, but my throat wouldn't let sound out or air in. Dot was getting more and more agitated, cussing me for saying Gloria was gone when she obviously was not. I was done fumbling for that damn switch, and with everything I had in me, I entered the room, lifted Dot out of bed, and led her to the landing. Dot was happy to be out and began telling me to get her clothes for the day, and she wanted to dress on the landing. I'm ashamed to say I tried to talk her out of it and come downstairs for a cuppa first, as I was shitting myself. But no, Dot had to do it her way. With my jaw clenched and eyes watering, I went back into the room. As I tried to find the switch, I scowled at how little I get paid for this shit. No, my feelings don't matter. It was Dot who counted, and she needed me. It wasn't bravery, because I was not brave at all. I eventually located the switch whilst the moans on the bed continued, and I realized as my eyes adapted to the dark that I could now actually see a pair of ladies' legs and a bit of nightdress at the end of Gloria's bed. The light went on, and I was trembling so much, and there on the bed, was Mabel. Mabel had a room downstairs. Mabel had dementia and had gone to wake her husband up for work and make the bed. Mabel's husband had passed many years before, and she had in fact gotten confused, lost, and took the servants' stairs. Then she found Gloria's bed and decided to make it. She had even gotten into the cupboards and fetched clean bedding. I actually dropped to my knees, eyes watering tears of relief. I shuffled on my knees over to Mabel and hugged her, laughing with relief. I had a serious word with the bosses over this, as Mabel could have been hurt wandering around, and we were far too few staff and not trained for this. No ghosts or monsters, but this was one time I was scared. Really, really scared. Who Was He? Submitted by India Inky. First off, I'm a 28-year-old actress and I live in Hollywood, California. I grew up just outside of LA, so I'm familiar with the area. My parents are both lawyers in the entertainment business, so I'm also familiar with many people in music and movies, and I've been spoiled enough to meet a lot of famous people. No, I'm not famous, but I like what I do, and hey, you never know. My friend just told me about your channel, and that you read stories like mine, so here I am. And after listening a bit, I think what happened to us is right up your alley. About 3 years back, my friend, let's say her name is Amy, told me she got invited to a party up in the hills and that she wanted to bring me. There was supposed to be a lot of industry people at it, and she thought we could meet some and maybe get some more work. I didn't really need it as I have a lot going on, but she banked a lot on a couple of projects that fell through and was looking for anything other than going back to waitressing in the shop she used to work in. I said sure. We got all dressed up and splurged on an Uber Black to get to the place. The house was huge, like I knew it would be, and it was a warm night even for the winter, so there were people in and out all night. Amy was right. There were a number of influentials at the party. She was really working it and having some great conversations with the right people. And that's when I noticed a guy across the room, and he caught my eye. I am a very confident person. My parents raised me to be, and when I looked back at the guy, he didn't look away, and neither did I. He was very good looking, but looked out of place somehow. His suit was really expensive, and he kind of reminded me of Tyler from 21 Pilots. We just stared at each other for at least 10 or 15 seconds, and he finally got up and went out a door on the other side of the room, and I thought, well, that was funny. So the party was still going on, and Amy came over to tell me some news about a contact she just made, and these two hotties came over to us and started talking. We all got some champagne, and man, everything at these parties is always super high-end, and we're so spoiled being there because we're really just peons to these people. But we started talking some more with these guys. One guy, let's call him Eric, was talking to me most of the time, and the other guy, let's say Jared, was focused on Amy. They were brothers and musicians and actually lived up the street from this house. Super rich guys that lived in their father's house while he was living in the Caribbean or something like that. They were really funny and really nice, and we enjoyed hanging out with them and were getting a little tipsy. Every now and again I would look around and see the other guy, but every time I tried to point him out to Amy, he would be gone. I'm not going to drag out the rest of the party, but Jared was really hitting on Amy by midnight, and she was going for it. She needed to go to the bathroom, and when we got in there were a bunch of women snorting a ton of cocaine, and they offered us some. I won't lie, we both did a line, and it amped us up a bit. That's when Amy told me the guys wanted to go back to their house and hang out. And right away I was skeptical. I mean, they were cool and all, but I'm not stupid. Two young rich guys, we barely know them, I mean, it could go really bad, I said to Amy. But she was convinced they were okay. She kept saying, look, they live right up the street, we have our cell phones, our friends and even our parents know we're here. I was still not cool with it when we went back to the party, but we hung out some more and I was starting to think maybe it would be okay to go with them. But first I texted my brother and let him know where I was going, and to text me every hour for the next few just so we could stay in contact. He was cool with this plan as he was laying low at his apartment that night. He lived over in Silver Lake, and that wasn't too far away. We had another glass of champagne and then said okay to Jared's next invitation to go back to their place. It was something like 5 houses down, but it was another Hollywood Hills palace for sure. So we went in, and the guys led us outside to their pool, and they turned on the lights. The view was incredible, and they disappeared to get some drinks, and Amy and I were just giggling about the guys. At this point, I was buzzing but not drunk, and I was relaxed enough, even though I had been on edge earlier. Eric and Jared came out with a bottle of Cristal, 4 glasses, and 2 guitars. Eric popped the bottle open, and we all had a glass while they proceeded to play us some songs they had written. In all fairness, I don't remember if they were that good because the champagne was going to my head, but at the same time, not really. Then things changed. I remember standing up saying I needed to go to the bathroom, and things were getting cloudy. I also remember being in a room with couches and everything looking like it was in slow motion. I saw Jared on top of Amy on a couch on the other side of a fireplace, and I could see she was struggling, but again, everything was in slow motion. For a second, I realized that my fears were correct earlier, and that I was in trouble. And that's when I felt Eric get on top of me, and he started to take off my clothes. I couldn't move, I couldn't speak, but I knew what was happening. Now, this is where things go from terrifying to holy shit. I'm trying to scream, but I can't. I mean, I'm about to be raped, and so is Amy. Then the lights went out. I mean, pure darkness. It wasn't like the lights got turned off. I mean, the entire room went black. 1 minute I could see this guy's face leaning down towards mine, and then it was just gone. Then the lights came back on just as fast as they went off, and I remember looking at Amy, and this thing standing over her and Jared. I say thing because it was big, like 8 feet tall big. It was all black with its back to me, and it reached out to Jared with one hand and picked him right up off the couch and held him in the air. I felt Eric get off of me, and I think he yelled something, but this thing just literally threw Jared across the room into a wall, and while everything was all swimmy, I cannot forget the thump and crunch his body made when it hit the concrete wall. The thing turned around and caught Eric by the neck and did the same thing. I knew this was crazy. The guys had to be like 180 pounds apiece, and they just got ragdolled by this thing. That's when I got shocked into full consciousness. The thing turned to me, and it was the guy from the party. I shit you not, I'm not lying. It was the 21 Pilots looking guy, but he was just huge now. He or it or whatever it was standing there staring at me for the second time that night. It was another 10 to 15 seconds of staring, and then he walked over to some glass doors and went outside to the pool. I got up slowly and was a tad woozy. Amy was out like a light, and the guys were lying on the floor on the other side of the room. I stumbled my way out into the fresh air, and there he stood. I tried to say hello or something to get his attention, but that part I don't really recall. But this guy, thing, or whatever was back to regular size. He just turned around and said in a super deep voice, "They aren't dead. Get your friend. Get out. Call your brother." That's when his eyes flashed red. I swear on a stack of Bibles, his eyes turned red for a second. And there was an acrid smell in the air too, like rotting meat or maybe burning rotting meat. I can't really describe it, but it stunk. I backed into the house, more scared than sick at this point, and tried to wake up Amy. She did finally get up slowly, and I half dragged her out of the house and down the street. It was now like 3 a.m. and about a half hour after my brother's last text he sent, and just then another one popped up. I was bawling my eyes out as I called him and told him to come get us, and he said okay. Amy started throwing up and wailing, and about 15 minutes later a light came on, and a guy came out to see what the hell was going on. I told him we were okay and that my brother was coming to get us, and he just stared at us. 2 model actresses with smeared makeup, no shoes, one puking on his lawn, and both crying. He kept asking questions, and I just pointed to the house we came from and said the guys were bastards or something, and he walked over to it and stood out front. My brother pulled up a little bit later, and we were out of there. We never reported it. We talked about doing something, but I don't know how bad they were hurt, and what was I going to say about that? My brother was even having a hard time buying my story and actually went back to the house after he took us to his place. He said the front door was shut and locked, and no one answered the door. Amy and I were okay. Shaken up, but we were okay. So we decided to not go to the police. Anyway, the reason I bring this up now is because a few weeks ago I was with my fiancée at a place in North Hollywood, and there was a guy playing and singing. I recognized the tune and almost shit my skirt. I looked up, and it was the Jared guy at the microphone. He played a few more songs as I tried to tell the story to my man, and I hadn't shared any of it with him yet. I hadn't really described the guy/thing that saved us in detail. And the Jared guy stopped playing, and he looked up at me, and his eyes got super wide. He quickly packed up his guitar and went out a side door of the place. My fiancée went to the bathroom and came back smiling and said, "You'll never believe this. I just bumped into the guy from 21 Pilots in the bathroom." I didn't say anything else about it. That's my story, and it's 100% true. I hope you'll share it. I don't know who or what that guy or thing was, but it was scary as hell even though he saved us. Anyone listening who might have an idea, I'm open to opinions. We Didn't Stay Long by Anonymous. I can't remember the year, but my daughter was 15 and she's 26 now, so you do the math. But it was not a good year for us here in Yuma, Arizona. My daughter was just getting over a serious illness and I was out of work. We had taken a vacation the year before to visit with the cousins in West Virginia, and it was a great time. They really wanted us to visit again. So, pack up we did. Me, Jen, and my mom, who I call Nanny. We had a great time and everyone was so wonderful that we decided to move from Arizona to West Virginia and kind of start over. We began looking at houses before coming home to sell ours and pack up. After a lot of searching, we found a 2-story home in a little town named Eleanor. It sat on about an acre with huge elm trees and a big area for a garden. It was 2 stories with 4 bedrooms upstairs and a bathroom, a stairwell with a skylight and wonderful banisters. Downstairs was a huge kitchen, a bathroom, dining room, living room, and another bedroom, with wood floors and beams throughout. All for $30,000. No kidding. And besides, we had talked about how lonesome the house seemed and wanted us to move in and fix it up. So back home we went and packed up all the dogs and cats and books and beds and moved 2,300 miles away. We moved into the house in August. It's really sticky in West Virginia in August, and we didn't have AC. But as we started setting up housekeeping, we were sleeping in the downstairs bedroom because it was always cooler in there, even during the hottest parts of the day. We thought it was because it was over the cellar of the house that had been dug out so you could get to the plumbing. Yeah, okay, that was our thinking. We painted and carpeted and everything was going fine. It was a mess to clean up, though. The house had been vacant for about 3 years, and before that an invalid had lived there. We had to rip out all of the carpeting from the upstairs because it was really gross, and the stains were everywhere, especially in the small front room over the downstairs cool room, and our nanny had picked that to be her bedroom. Cleaned up and sparkling, the house seemed to welcome us. But then some different sights, sounds, and smells began to come into our lives. First, let me tell you that all 3 of us are sensitive to some sights, sounds, and smells to a certain degree. That is why I don't know why none of us really knew what was going on. It started with Nanny hearing a rocking chair in the living room at night. We didn't have a rocking chair. Then Jennifer and I kept seeing shadows coming down the stairs as we sat in the living room. The bedroom stayed cold, and we had to have heavy curtains put on the windows, hoping to keep out drafts, and we finally just ended up using that room as storage. Where my bedroom was, I could see across the upstairs landing to the door of Jennifer's room. I began to see a shadow almost every night pause outside the door and look in as though it were a parent that had come to check on a child at night. There was a nice, soft, and friendly feeling with her, and Jennifer was also aware of the shadow. But then we began experiencing a smell from the downstairs bathroom. It smelled like a dead animal left out in the Arizona sun too long. We had some guys come over and check the cellar crawl space for a toilet leak or even a dead skunk or a cat, but it was clean and dry. The smell only happened so often and seemed to only last for 5 or 15 minutes, but when it was there, we all smelled it, and so did others. We also experienced bright orbs and flits of light in and over the garden at night, and no, they weren't fireflies. We started having what we thought were health problems, too. Even though Jennifer was well when we moved out here, she seemed to relapse into a bad state, not wanting to get out of bed. And even Nanny and I started having lots of colds and flu-like symptoms where we just didn't want to seem to get out of bed. We all loved to travel and visit, but now all we did was stay in the house. Our animals even seemed to be in a slump. I mean, some of the cats slept for like 16 hours a day. I was especially worried about my mom because she is a true A-type of personality. I mean, work, 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 work. And now all she did was sleep or sit on the porch. We didn't even look for jobs, and we were slowly running out of money. This was so unlike us. Then, one night Mom and I were in the living room, and Jen was upstairs in her room reading in bed. As I said, she was reading, and she happened to look up from her book and into the corner. And at first, she thought there was a fire. I mean, there was a black cloud forming in the corner. As she watched, almost in a daze, the cloud seemed to be forming a shape of a body. And when the head began to appear, she screamed and ran. She would not go back into the room even to get her clothes, and she moved in with me and Nanny, the bravest soul in the house, and she went back and brought out the clothes. Because we were running out of money, and Jennifer's health was in another decline, we decided to move back to Arizona. We sold or gave away all of our stuff, and with just as much personal items as we could get into a small U-Haul, plus our 4 cats and a dog, we trundled home. Later, we began to put all the feelings and things together, and the list grew and grew. I mean, there was a lot more going on than we were paying attention to or spoke about. Much more than what I've written here. We finally, after 4 years, were able to sell the house, and now it's a type of office complex or something. I don't know if they've had any problems or not, and I don't really care. Encounter in the Woods by Inexpressibles. My friend and I are into building large forts out of sticks at her house, and she has a large hill at the back of her house that takes at least 5 or 6 minutes to climb without a break to get to the top where our fort was. We typically planned everything out before we went up there, so it wasn't a continuous effort to walk up and down the grueling hill. One evening when I was at her house, we decided to go up to the top of the hill and walk along the path, which led to a creek, which we both gave the nickname of Crawfish Pond. As we walked along the dirt terrain and got further away from her property, we both saw corn scattered on the ground. The odd thing was, it wasn't hunting season, so why would there be corn on the ground? We both got suspicious as we walked about 5 minutes away from our fort at the top of the hill. We decided just to make the walk back and not risk someone finding us trespassing on their property. When we got back, my friend had put her phone onto one of the flat rocks and started playing some music. Our fort was actually quite big and looked pretty sick. There was a few sticks balanced on one large gap in one of the biggest trees, conveniently placed. We put nails in the large sticks and started lining the outside with much smaller sticks. The larger part of it was practically done, besides the smaller top in which we had cut the sticks down to size in order to allow them to fit. I was inside, clearing out large and small rocks, while my friend was working on the outside. Before I continue, I'd like to mention that after you get to the top of the hill, the distance after it goes out for miles before there's civilization. Continuing on, everything was going smoothly until I heard a twig crack in the distance, and a few leaves shuffle around because it was fall. I instantly whipped my head around to see a man approaching from the direction of where there was miles and miles of nothing. This guy was pretty heavy-set, so obviously he couldn't have walked that whole distance. So where the hell else could he have come from? This situation would have been less confusing if he approached from the side of the hill where more houses were located, but he was just standing there about 100 feet away from us. I turned to my friend and muttered a quiet, "Hey, look!" and she turned her head to see the man standing there too. She was completely frozen in fear, and so was I, But soon enough, the man locked eyes with us and started to quicken his pace towards us, an evil glare on his face. Again, he looked at least 350 or 400 pounds, so he obviously ran slower than most, coming at us, not ever saying a word. We were two 16-year-old girls, so we were much smaller than him and just made the decision to run. We quickly gathered our nails, hammer, and drill into the drawstring bag my friend had brought with us, and we ran down that hill. In our friendship, my friend was more into writing and relaxing, and I was more into sports. So, I had my ass down that hill in 30 seconds tops, tripping over fallen trees and such in the process. My friend was scared. She was too down the hill quickly, but a little bit further behind me. Once both of us made it safely down the hill, her grandmother saw our panic and came outside questioning what was going on. My friend started to explain everything, and her grandmother ushered us inside. But before I walked in, I turned around only to see the man standing there at the top of the hill, staring down at us. We didn't call the police and dismissed the situation after a few hours until her dad came home and we explained everything to him. He said we would go check another day, which he did and found nothing out of the order or suspicious. A few weeks passed and I came over once again, and we went back up the hill to take apart the fort and move it closer to her house, just to be safe. Once we were up there, we took off the outer layer of sticks for about an hour and then attempted to roll them down the hill. After what seemed like forever, we finally removed the sticks that held the structure together and rolled them down the hill too. I was just about to roll them down, my friend called my name with fear in her voice. I turned around to see her pointing up at the tree. Then I looked up and noticed that the thick branch that was holding up the entire fort was cut, though thankfully the fort hadn't toppled over from that. Now, you may think that it was possible that the weight of the fort was too much for the tree and snapped the branch, but that wasn't the case. Live tree branches usually bend without snapping, so if anything, the tree branch would have just bent, but this one had been completely cut. In fact, I just now thought about it and realized that there was no leftover branch anywhere. Obviously, I'm assuming the same man came back up and tried to cut down our fort and then ran away with the branch he had cut. After this, we didn't go up there for quite some time, focusing on building the fort down at the bottom of the hill near her house. Though we both got curious and wanted to check up there to see if anything had changed, so we started making the climb up to the top once again. About 3/4 of the way up, I noticed a large nail buried under a few leaves, so I showed my friend and we both realized that it was from a small box of nails in which we had left up there. We ended up finding a few more, then headed back down, noticing the empty box a few feet down. After a bit of contemplation, we both realized that the man had probably taken his chances in coming back up, found the nails, then just threw them down the hill. To this day, we both haven't seen any more changes, and we haven't seen that man. Sometimes, though, we both question what would have happened if we hadn't run away from him. My Time as a Security Guard, submitted by SC Thunder. I worked 12 years in security, and I'm currently an assistant manager for the firm I work at. Here's a few scary situations that have occurred in my years as a guard. My first assignment was guarding an industrial shop that repairs mining equipment. The shop is located next to multiple businesses in a graveyard, which is rumored to be haunted. The workers would tell me that they would see shadow people and an old-world train conductor walking through the shop during the late-night hours. When they told me their stories, I was already there for a few years, as it took them a while to feel comfortable to talk to me. During those years, I have never seen or heard anything until one night I was doing my walkthrough of the shop. I heard a ratchet wrench cranking. I paused as no one works past 4 p.m. and the time was 2 a.m. So I walked towards the noise and nothing was there. The noise continued and I laughed, thinking somebody was pranking me. I walked to the outside to see if someone was on the outside of the shop, but nothing. I returned to the location and the noise continued, so I just said, "Keep up the good work," and I continued on my rounds. After 6 years at the shop, I was promoted to road patrol. My job is to patrol all the sites that belong to the firm, and I was scheduled for night shift, and I loved it. Some of the sites we check are located in the middle of nowhere. One night, about 3 a.m., I was riding up an isolated road in the middle of the woods. I drove up a large hill and came to a stop sign where I can turn left onto a rural road which you have to have a 4x4, or right where there are well pads and farms with a newly paved road. On the left, I noticed a black Charger sitting with its lights off, and I thought to myself, no way would I drive that on those crappy roads. As I began to turn right, the person in the Charger begins waving to me to drive towards its vehicle. I was like, nope, and I made my turn, and as I made my way around a hillside, I saw the Charger speed up behind me, flashing its brights on and off. I continued on my route as I approached another stop sign. I stopped and saw the owner of the Charger get out, and he slowly walked up towards my driver's side window. I put my Tahoe in drive and left the driver of the Charger in my dust. I turned down a road where my 4x4 was needed, and I looked in my rear view mirror to see if the Charger was following, in which it did come up to the road, stopped and backed off the road I went down, and then drove down the paved road. That told me the driver knew the area, and for the rest of the night I didn't see the car, and I didn't care to know what he or they wanted. A couple of years later, I was still on road patrol and managed to get my friend RC hired. He also worked as a road patrol guard. One night I was in the office eating lunch when RC called to tell me that outside our office gate was a pickup truck parked to the side of the road and he wanted backup. We did that as one of us would talk while the other guard wrote down the plate number. I took lead as I drove up to the pickup truck. It had tinted windows and dragon designs on the side, and they were colored dark green with 10-ply tires. I was expecting a couple of teenagers looking for a quiet place to do teenager things. I rolled down my passenger side window and asked if they were okay. The driver in the truck rolled down their window, and a woman and a man in their late 50s greeted me. I smiled and again asked if they were okay. The lady said in a weird tone, "We are fine, just driving around." The hairs on my neck immediately went up as my gut was screaming that something wasn't right. I replied, "Okay, I thought you were broken down and this is a lonely road." I began to roll my window up and the lady repeated herself in the same tone. "We are fine, just driving around." I said, "Okay," and before I could put my window up, the woman asked, "We aren't from around here. Could you tell us where this road leads to?" She asked, still talking in a creepy low tone. The man in the passenger seat never took his eyes off me as he stared at me like a wolf staring at a baby deer. I told them where the road went as my gut continued to scream at me to get the hell away from them. She just grinned and nodded and they drove off. My friend and I followed to make sure they didn't pull into the no trespass zones that we patrolled. And for someone who didn't know the area, she sure maneuvered around the turns as they disappeared from our sight. I talked to my friend and he said the plate was West Virginia, and we both agreed there was something off about them. And why would they drive to Ohio at this time of night? We searched the area where they parked but never found anything. Anyway, everyone, be careful out there, because you never know who you'll meet on the road. My UFO Experiences by Brian V. This happened in 1966. I was 7 years old, lying in a cot in my cousin's bedroom. His cot was on the other side of the room. It was the middle of the night and very dark, and we didn't have a nightlight. My cousin and I were on the third floor of a brown wooden apartment tenement. The walls were rough-hewn chocolate brown wood with no sheetrock, and you could see daylight out of the cracks. Nothing fancy. My uncle had just started working for the fire department. In the middle of the night, I woke up when I felt pressure on my cot. I looked down at the foot of my cot, and one of them was sitting on it. The other two were standing at the foot of the cot looking at me. There was a faint light emanating from them somehow, so I could barely discern what they were, and the light eventually brightened. Later, and much later, even now, I can still recall the beautiful, vivid electric blue light. They were tiny, thin, and gray, no more than 3 feet tall. They looked very fragile. However, I didn't have any fear of them. They communicated to me through telepathy, and they didn't say much. All I can remember them saying to me was, "Do not be frightened." And I wasn't. As I watched, a circle of beautiful, brilliant, and indescribable blue light appeared behind them, and I remember one of them going into the light, and I knew this is where I was going too. The entire episode lasted about 3 minutes, and I remember falling asleep before they were gone. My cousin never woke up throughout the entire ordeal. How can I describe them? Well, you've seen them in stickers, pictures, the typical alien. Large head, black oval eyes too large in proportion to their heads, a slit for a mouth, and 2 small holes for a nose. Their long, spindly limbs seemed to be too frail, yet there they were. When I woke up the next morning, my left pinky finger was aching. I felt it, and in the middle segment of the digit I felt what seemed to be a BB of some sort. I knew it wasn't there before, and I told my mother about the entire incident, and she beat me severely and would not even consider feeling the BB in my finger. So I suffered in silence for many years. Since then, I've asked my doctor if he'd x-rayed my finger, and he said not unless there was a reason to. I didn't tell him why, or he'd probably think I was nuts. I've been x-rayed for chest pains repeatedly, and I've always semi-jokingly asked the x-ray tech if they've ever done alien implant x-rays, or has anyone ever requested one. They always laugh and tell me no, but we have found a lot of interesting things in rectums. My doctor says the BB in my finger is a fatty deposit, but I disagree because I knew it wasn't there the night before I saw them. No one believed me. I think it is like a tag. I haven't seen them since. And no, this wasn't a dream. It was the real McCoy. It really actually happened. How could I have known what they looked like at that age? According to my parents and my uncle, I described them perfectly. They were exactly like the ones you see described by thousands of people worldwide. This might sound strange, but I have a feeling, just a feeling mind you, that they have protected me throughout my life. They've caused me to have success. Strange, isn't it? I have never been hurt, or in a car wreck, or received a speeding ticket even. It's very odd. I think it is very possible that they are monitoring and especially influencing thoughts. When I was a child, after the incident with the aliens, my mother was amazed at the things I would come up with. I would make innocent predictions, and remember, I was just a kid, and they would always come true. She was dumbfounded. She said I could predict the future. I think she was afraid of me, and that's why she beat me so much and made me sleep at my other relatives' houses. And how about this story? I had a good friend in Mount Holm Air Force Base in Idaho. He decided he wanted to work at the top-secret site called Area 51, or the Tonopah test site as we knew it. They worked on top-secret aircraft, and he worked on the F-111-7A. To work there, however, you needed top-secret clearance. They asked me to work there, but I turned it down as I was getting out. We had a TDY to Nellis Air Force Base, and I was selected to go, so I immediately called my friend and told him when I'd be there. He told me that'd be great, and to give him a call when I was at the dorm, and he would pick me up, and we'd fly his radio-controlled planes for fun. So we did, and before we went to the RC airfield, he wanted to stop at the hobby shop for some parts. Well, he bought what he needed, and we were off to the field. We came to a red light, and we were in the right lane, and I decided to ask him about aliens and what his thoughts were. The second I uttered aliens, he turned pale, ran the red light, did a U-turn in all that traffic with horns blaring, and drove me back to the base. On the way, I kept asking him, "Dude, what's the matter? What did I say?" But he would not answer any of my questions. He stayed pale and angry, and then dropped me off at the dorm, and I never saw or heard from him since. Hey, I'm not insane, and I know what I saw. I'm 48 now, and I can remember all of this like it was yesterday. I know they exist. The Orange Chair, submitted by S. Rozo. I was 14 years old when this strange occurrence happened. My father met his wife Christina in 2010, and he moved away to live with her in a town 3.5 hours away. My dad's friend Vanna was taking a trip to the same town to visit family, so I jumped in with her and decided to catch a ride with her up for the weekend to spend some time with my dad. When pulling into town, Vanna said she needed to use the bathroom and pulled in at her grandmother's home. As we arrived there, her grandmother had just gotten home as well. We entered the house, and it was sort of an old-school home. She was an older lady, so pictures of all her grandkids and great-grandchildren were covering the walls. The minute we walked into the home, I felt as if I was being watched. She had 2 bathrooms in the house, so as they made their way to the bathroom, I stayed back in the living room and waited for Vanna. I didn't see anyone else when we first arrived, but as I looked toward the living room, I saw an older man. He looked to be in his mid-60s. He was sitting in an old vintage orange chair, reading a newspaper, and looking back at me smiling. He was wearing Wranglers and an orange plaid shirt, and I didn't remember seeing anyone else in the house when we entered, and I just couldn't believe what I was seeing. So I blinked and looked again, and he was gone. I wasn't necessarily scared, but I was a bit shocked. Right after, Vanna came out of the bathroom and we left. Throughout the evening, I just couldn't shake the feeling of what I had seen. My dad noticed my distant behavior and asked what was wrong. I was hesitant to speak on it, but after a while I did. My dad told me he knew who I had seen and told me to call Vanna and tell her immediately. I called Vanna and told her what I had seen. She asked me to describe the man, and she began to cry and told me that who I had seen was her grandfather, and he had died in the house 15 years earlier. She said that was his chair, and she was glad to know he was still around looking over them occasionally. Later that weekend, she hugged me and cried and thanked me for telling her. I felt like it brought her comfort, and maybe he was just stopping back in to check on them. Thanks for listening, gang. It's always a pleasure to hang out with you around the campfire. If you haven't already, please like, share, and subscribe to this channel for updates when the newest stories come out. And I hope that you'll check out all of the other stories here on my channel. If you've got a story that you'd like to hear, please send it to unclejoshtruescarystories@gmail.com. Follow me on social media. There are links to all of my outlets in the description below. And if you feel so inclined, hey, leave me a tip in my tip jar on my Patreon account. You can help keep this channel going ad-free. Thanks again for listening, and I'll be back with more scary stories in just a little bit. But until then, remember, be wary of things that go bump in the night. It could be anything. A ghost, a monster, or the guy next door.